Hi everybody, thanks for coming to our webinar today. We're going to get everything started. So today's topic is how to better measure, evaluate, and communicate your philanthropic impact. So just to give you a quick agenda of what we'll be covering today, we'll start with some introductions. We'll just give you a brief overview of what our impact measurement framework is. And then we'll walk you through 3 stages of how you can define your measures, evaluate your data, and present your impact. And then we'll finish off by a question and answer period at the end. So maybe I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Eric Lauer, Director of Client Experience here at SmartSimple. I've been with the company since its inception in 2002. So quite familiar with the platform and the business and overall sense of things. Some of you may have met me over the years with working with SmartSimple. And I'll let Tim introduce himself.
Thanks very much, Eric. My name is Tim Dasyk, and I'm the Director of Advanced Analytics here at SmartSimple. In contrast, I've been with SmartSimple for 2 years, or almost 2 years, I guess I should say. But I've got, as you can see from my picture, a 30-year-plus background in statistics and analytics, data analysis, that sort of thing. And I'll be talking for part of the time about the impact framework and how that works.
Great. So maybe just a background on SmartSimple. Again, here we have a slide. I won't just read the bullet points out to you, but you know, we're a platform. We live in the cloud. We work across several vertical markets, including research granting, philanthropic granting, even case management, for example. We have a lot of clients across the globe with their constituents. I think we've touched almost every continent around the world. We're an advanced technology partner with Amazon. We can host globally as well. So we have a lot of features and functionality to offer through our platform. And as one component of this is our impact framework. So I'll pass the mic over to Tim, and he can get us started with the webinar today.
Thanks very much. So just to give you a little bit of background on the idea around the impact measurement framework, really what we're talking about here is an approach that allows us to understand and to measure and to present impact. And we do that through a combination of an approach plus the tools that reside on the SmartSimple platform. We have a number of capabilities as far as the impact framework goes, as we've listed here. It allows us to understand disparities within some of the data. It allows us to map the data onto a common framework. And basically, the framework that we're talking about has 2 axes, which we can then subdivide into 4 quadrants. The 2 axes that we have, and I'll talk about this in detail in just a moment, are impact, which measures the impact by reviewers, by managers, by funders, et cetera, and then we take a look at investment. And I'm using investment in the broadest of terms, so we can think about that as a measure of the sort of effort that has been made within a particular project or within a particular area that we're working on. Now, all of this, when put together, allows us, or allows SmartSimple, to convert data into information. And that's very important because we can have a lot of approaches that deal with data, but how do we go about pulling out, understanding, presenting, and digesting the information that's contained in there? I think the impact framework is one of those tools, approaches that we have that allow us to do exactly that. So let's take a look at this. We also have, along, as I mentioned, we have an approach as well. It's a system. And we have, along with that, the 7 rules for impact intelligence, or for understanding impact. Now, I'm not going to read these. I'm going to assume that you can read at least as well as I can. So I've got these mapped up here, but this will walk us through the process. And so Eric and I are going to ping pong back and forth as we go through this, me talking about the theoretical, and of course Eric talking about the practical side, or the workable side of this. So first of all, let's talk about, as we indicated in the agenda, defining the measures. So rule number 1, start with the end in mind, and this is a very common rule for data analysis, data mining, predictive analytics. What is it I want to know? What do I want to do today? And that's the question you have to really ask yourself. Do we need to understand success versus failure, best versus worst, costly versus cheap, big impact versus small impact? what is it? We should map this out, and we should keep on going back to look at what is it we're trying to do? Where are we trying to go with this? Now, I point out here, just to be a little bit disparaging, this doesn't always work. Our impact framework is used to allow us to measure two axes or two things only. Now, that doesn't mean that if you've got 3 items or 3 components or 5 components or 6 dimensions you want to measure, that doesn't mean we can't do that. We can. Please reach out to us. We can talk to you about some of our other capabilities as far as advanced analytics go. But the impact framework works on a 2-dimensional design. And so what we're basically doing here is, well, the other comment I would make is plan for what's going to be done with the results. So we also want to think about, when I've got those results, so what? Where do I want to go from here with these results? How am I going to use them? Rule number 2, ask the same question. And this is kind of a standard sort of approach that says, we want to make sure that everybody is asked the same question on a particular piece of work that we are doing, to ensure that our axes that we're working with are commonly understood and are commonly worked with. The impact question is basically the vertical axes, and what we're basically doing is we're looking at what is the impact of this. It must be the same for all of our projects that are being compared. That doesn't mean that between projects you can ask a different question, but if we're going to build a framework and we're going to work with these axes, we want to make sure that we're asking the same question. And I've got some examples here, and you can read these examples here. What has been the impact of this grant, for example? How successful was this project or these projects or whatever? So as long as all of our raters are rating on the same scale, we've got what it is we want to do. By that same token, we also want to use the same measure. And the measure should be the same. That's the horizontal axis, by the way. So now we've defined our vertical and our horizontal axis, and the measure should be constant. This might require some conversion or some need to work with a baseline or a base currency or something like that. But let me give you a couple of examples. We're looking at X people per week, or this many hours per student, or this type of, these many events per county. Whatever it is, we want to make sure that, again, we have that consistency of the axis. So now we're really looking at a situation where we've got 2 consistent axes, the X and the Y, the horizontal and the vertical, and that way we can begin to build into our impact framework. Now, the other things we've done here is let's define, sorry about that. Let's define some of the measures. Let's talk about scales for a little bit. And what I want to do here, and I want to talk about scales, and we want to look at answers or responses must be the same. So we're typically looking at the same or some similarity within the scale. Let me give you a couple of tips for scaling our responses. What we want to do here is we want to use an odd number of responses. So 5 or a 7-point scale or something like that. The other thing I would recommend is do not try to be overly precise. So don't use like a 15-point or 17-point scale. That is far too precise. Our respondents, our raters, will have a difficulty understanding that or a difficulty in consistently responding to that. 5- and 7-point scales are very common, and they're scales we all understand and we feel very comfortable with. The other thing we want to do here is we want to use a neutral midpoint. So I might want to use value number 3 as being average, or value number 5 as being neutral, or something like that. We want to have that middle point that we can understand, and as a final point here, number 4, is we want to balance the scale. So if we have 3 negative or down sort of examples, we might have 3 up examples or positive types of examples, so some design like that. Here's some examples of what a scale might look like. So you can see here a 5-point scale, very good, good, average, poor, very poor. There's a 7-point scale. By that same token, it's personally something I like to use, is I like to use an end anchor set as well, where we say, okay, 1 is unsuccessful, 5 is successful, 3 is average or midpoint or something like that. Let people decide what it is they want. Let our raters, let our grant makers decide what it is they want to give this. Oh, and by the way, I should point out here with the end anchor scale that I kind of like, because I'm a very a far more technical person than Eric or Jeff here, you can also use things like 1.5 or 2.7 or something like that. What depends upon what people feel comfortable with, but that's why I like to use the end anchor scale. But really, it's your choice. The point here, you do the same thing for all of our raters, for all of our reviewers, for all of our grantees, etc., etc.
Great, and if maybe I can step in here. So thanks, Tim, for giving the information on the background on how you should set up or measure or scale for the raters purposes. What you're seeing on the screen here is how we would manifest that using the impact framework within SmartSimple. So on the screen here, what we're showing is our what we refer to as our question set builder. So this is a tool within SmartSimple that maybe a program staff can use, and every for each program you can create your own set of questions that maybe you want people to ask, for example, in terms of a use case. But on the screen here, what you have is any number of dynamically created questions. In this case, we got 4. If we click the plus sign, we can add another one. But what's happening here is in the first column, we get to choose the type of field we want to use. And this ranges from everything from, like you can see here, a text box, we want to use a number, radio buttons or a multi-select type approach, or a single select, like drop-down type style. The second column is just pretty much a free-form text where you type in the question you want to ask. And the third column is where you would put that scale that Tim was referencing. So in SmartSimple here, you can see on the second row, we have poor, neutral, great. Each, poor will give you a score of 0, 1 neutral, 2 great. So that's the way that's sort of set up in here. The ones that are empty are just placeholders where you can put maybe some tooltip text to say, hey, you should keep this as a, less than so many words. And the rest of the columns in this particular screen are really just to control formatting. Do I want this field to be mandatory? If it is numeric, how many decimal points do I want to allow? And if it's a currency, then which currency should I show, given that SmartSimple supports any number of currencies. Great. And then on the screen here is we're just seeing a little kind of a montage of what how it presents. So the previous screen was how we would set up our questions. And once we have configured that, our raters would then be presented with this view where I can actually key in and code in the answers that I want to calculate. Thanks. And just one thing here, and please don't focus too much on the code that you're seeing on the screen. We kind of chose these screenshots just to give you and convey that we can handle anything from a very simple calculation to something very complicated. So if you are doing a crazy calculation and you're pulling in values from all over the system, including from external, I mean, we can compare results from, let's say, the US Census data. If I'm talking about impacting my local population, then I can see how that measures against my what the US Census is saying, for example. So in that case, we just wanted to show you by use of code that probably looks strange to everybody, except maybe Tim and myself. But it's really just what we're trying to say is our calculations can be as simple as you need it to be, or as complex as you need to be, or anywhere on the spectrum.
So let's go on to stage 2, which is the idea of evaluating the data. Eric, my entire career has been crazy calculations. Rule number 5. Moving on, rule number 5, let's understand the landscape here. So as I talked about earlier, we're looking at 2 axes, and on each of these axes breaks down to create 4 quadrants. And really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to tell the story in 4 parts, if you think about it. Take a look at the graphic that's on the bottom right-hand corner here, and you can see that. Now, you don't have to tell the story in all 4 parts, but we tend to concentrate on 2 particular parts of this once we have our results. And those parts we tend to look at, I've called the focus and the contrast. So the focus, by nature of the work we are doing, by nature of the tools we're providing, the focus gives us those which are providing, how can I say this, the most bang for the buck, the best, the ones that are really that are doing very, very well. The contrast, by that same token, are those who are not doing as well as all of the others. So very often we might use this story in two parts and say, look, here's the ones that are great, the best quadrant, and here's the ones which we might need a little more attention or a little more focus on, we might need to try and fix in some fashion or another. But by that same token, we've also got the 4 quadrants, and if you wanted to, we can talk about the idea of using the other quadrants, the expensive quadrant and the failure quadrant if we want to. We can build a story around that. But really, this is your part where you take over and say, here's what's going on, here's the information we're getting from our data. Rule number 6, we call winners and losers. And I'm kind of struggle with that term a little bit because it's a relative measure, so there really are no winners and losers, but we tend to like to look at things that way. What's doing the best? What's doing the worst? How well is our money being spent here? How much do we have to focus on how poorly our money perhaps is being spent there, right? There is better and worse performing items all the time. But remember, these are relative. When we are working with this, we're looking at a relative set. So within the set we've got who's doing the best, who's doing the worst. And finally, rule number 7, and that is the objectives and the summary, and what will be done with the information that we have here on the chart. And this is really where you get to talk about, to explain, to work with what it is that we're seeing. So, you know, what story it needs to be communicated here. So, for example, I provided a few examples here. We had the greatest success with these particular projects. We need to focus a little more, or we need to worry about these particular grants or this particular area if we wanted to. You know, if we like to go on, these charities were not as successful or were very successful, et cetera, et cetera. The whole point here is you control the conclusion and the messaging. Our SmartSimple's tools and SmartSimple's capabilities are going to help you in getting those tools turned into a messaging which you can begin to use, which you can begin to work with, which you can begin to explain to other people. Remember what I said, we're moving from data to information.
Great. And then this is just an example of that, the quadrants, the grid, with some data points plotted on it that Tim was talking to. Sorry, Tim, whenever I hear the winners and losers, I always think of the Glenn Glary, Glenn Ross with a young Alec Baldwin talking about that. Sorry, I just wanted to point that out.
But he is for winners, Eric.
That's right. That's right. So hopefully they would be in the top right corner over there. So the nice thing about this chart, and what we'll do is we'll take that data, we'll get all the answers from the questions that we proposed, and then we have the ranking that we would have put in the scale, and then when the system calculates and presents it to you, we can then turn that data around and present it to you using visualizations in the form of the 4 components of this graph here, for example, or in the case of the next slide, we can see that we can take that same information and maybe present it in a map-like format, where we can then control on the left-hand side, we can choose between or filter by different categories, regions, and then you can see here we've kind of simulated clicking on one of the icons to see, in particular, what was it that, what was the grant that compared onto here. Another way of presentation in terms of visualization, as we like to call it, is taking that same data and moving it into a different format. So in the case of, a map, you can do quite a bit of stuff with it in terms of, presenting any kind of overlay. You can use a lot of visuals, a lot of images, just like this here. In this case, right, we have the country, we have the different states. As I select one of the different states across the country, I can present, hey, what was the impact? Okay, here's the numbers. Here's some pictures of the location. Hey, take a look at that playground that was developed. Here's how many people it impacted. So this is, I think, the piece that Tim was driving at is, you're really creating that story. It's still your story. It's still your conclusions, but we're just helping you grab that data and then turn it into a nice presentation like this. And maybe at this point, Tim and I have done a lot of talking today, and maybe we'll turn that around and offer it up to the audience and see if there's any any questions maybe that we can help address. So the question here is, hi, it looks very interesting, and the question comes to us as, is this an add-on product or already in the SmartSimple product? Great question, and the answer is it's already there. So it's actually, it was introduced in the last upgrade, and it's available for all of our clients to use. There's no additional cost. We can show you how to, we can definitely take it offline and walk you through how to configure it and how to set it up. But it's available for you to use, and it's something that we do plan on improving even more in the upcoming releases. Yep. So thank you for your question. Oh, another question is, where is the question set of input screen? So this is a new feature that is coming out with, I believe, in this our May upgrade. So maybe I'll give you a little backstory on that. And I'll use the, my use case will be, I am a program staff, and I'm running a particular program for our foundation. And each time I run my program, I may want to ask a different set of questions, maybe to the reviewers, maybe to the grantees, but I need to present this. Now, typically, we support this functionality already, but typically you have to rely on your system administrator to go in and say, hey, this year we want to ask, or for this call, I want to ask these 3 additional questions. Well, okay, let me go into the configuration, I'll populate the questions, and all said and done. So the functionality is there, we can do that today. But we're again, and our focus for this year is what we're calling future-proofing. We want to take these configuration screens and make them even easier to use. So we're actually putting some of the configuration into the hands of the actual program staff. So now I can look at my program, I can go to the program itself and say, well, for this round or for this call, when I set up my review forms or my review sheets, I'm going to build my own question sets. I don't have to go to my system administrator. I can come into here and I can fill in, just as Jeff was showing on the screen there. I can type in my own questions as I feel fit. I can choose my field type. I don't have to be an administrator. I don't have to go to the back-end config. I have the control at my fingertips as the program staff. So we'll be doing other webinars on these topics as part of the upgrade, so please stay tuned for that. And if you, again, as always, if you need any help, please contact your account representative, support, or even myself, and we can definitely set up some one-on-one to walk you through how you can make use of this for your particular instance. Great. And maybe even on the call, if anyone, I know maybe your phones are muted, I know people have been making use of the chat, which is great. So here, just to if I can paraphrase, can we use the survey to, use the tool to run surveys? Currently, okay, perfect. So some people, I guess, are using just like a Survey Monkey, to use a common example. Yes, we have the ability to, with these question set builders, they're just activities within the system. I guess you could manifest them to the public. We are also, we have, I don't know if everyone's aware, we call it web forms in the system, but we do have our own sort of survey tool. We're looking to give it an overhaul as part of our development roadmap this year, as well, just like our discussion board. So kind of our modernization kind of approach. So stay tuned for that too, or if we can take this offline and we can discuss how you can manifest some of these forms. I know some of our clients are actually sending out surveys already using SmartSimple, so we can tell you how they are making use of that and maybe how you can incorporate that within the system. Another question is, can you track results over time? Yes. So I know I didn't want to really, I know Tim was talking about a two axes in our visuals. If some of you may have noticed, there was a third dimension there, and I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
But we can definitely do over time.
Absolutely. Yes. As we sort of move along from impact framework to impact understanding or to an impact history, there certainly is that third dimension where we can begin to look at things moving over time. We can begin to understand, here's where I was last year with my impact, here's where this project is this year with the impact. And we're looking at this in two different ways as we begin to continue our development. We're looking at this as the true three-dimensional capability, which is probably what you're thinking of and what Eric showed on his design there. But there are also some other graphical capabilities that can bring that dimensionality into understanding impact. So things that we're discussing in the early phases, things like dartboard charts and things like that, allow us to get alternate views of impact. And I guess I'm going to follow up on what Eric said, which is to stay tuned, because we're continually working to develop and to improve our capabilities. And we'll bring out some very interesting things in the next couple of releases, adding on to our capability for impact intelligence, if I might.
Okay, thanks. All right, I think those were the questions that had popped in via the chat through the Zoom meeting. So I really appreciate that. Great questions, guys. As always, as doing these kind of presentations is always nice to have some interaction back and forth. So if there's nothing else, any other questions, then maybe we'll wrap it up for today. I know everyone has busy schedules. If you do have any questions, always feel free to contact us, sales@smartsimple.com. You're more than welcome to reach out via there, or call us, or even come to our website and do a live chat. So thank you again for your time. Please follow up with us if you have any interest. We can always set up a one-on-one to discuss how this can fit into your own instance of SmartSimple and how we can get it even set up starting today. So like I said, that very first question, this is available right now. It's not down the road. You can start using it today. And that's great. I hope everyone else joins the rest of their morning, evening, or afternoon, depending on where you are in